Hey Dakota, it's time to make that new video. Oh come on, I just spent 5 hours editing that last one. Hey man, if you want to keep those viewers engaged, you gotta make at least 2 videos a week. I mean, I don't even know what to make the new video on. Well, there's that bioactive one you said you were gonna do in the last video, and then wasn't there like a Tegu tent one like a week ago? You could do those. Nah, you know what? Care video. I'm gonna do a care video. I don't know, man. Don't you think there's enough care videos out there already? No, we're gonna do a care video. Wrap this bad boy up in like 20 minutes. Hey guys, how's it going? My name's Dakota, I'm the owner of DBCB Exotics, and today we're going to talk a little bit on red-eyed crocodile skinks. Red-eyed crocodile skinks. We all know them as the little mini dragons that we see in popular posts like these on the internet. Now, red-eyed crocodile skinks originate from New Guinea, the same place where we get all of our cool geckos. Now, these little dudes are fairly new to the reptile trade, with our first imports coming in the mid-1990s. Today we're going to talk about how to care for and breed this species. Alright, before we start, if you guys are looking to get these guys and you don't know too much about them, in my opinion, they do not make the great pets. They're not very handleable, much like the chameleons. They stress really easy with any handling, so pretty much handling is going to be the minimum to none. Also, they're not a good display animal as well. I barely see these guys. As you can see, I have this 55-gallon plodarium that I made so I can put some fish in there and, you know, at least have something to see when I come in and check them out. Talk a little bit about heating and lighting. Now for heating, I keep my guys around room temperature, just stay a little warmer in here, so if your room is a little colder, I would suggest a small basking light to keep that temps around, let's say 75. Now as far as lighting goes, UVB is optional, however it's always beneficial for the animal, especially if you're breeding, so I personally will always use it. Currently I'm using just the 5.0 zoom-in compact bulb, and then I just have an LED on the water side just to give it some more lighting and help the plant grow. Now for humidity, you're going to want to keep it pretty high. Humidity ranges for these guys should be within 70 to 90%. A few ways to achieve this is creating a moist hide using a cork bark or any kind of hide and stuffing some sphagnum moss in there to help get that humidity up. Nice deep moist substrate will help, and also a large water area as well. Let's talk a little bit about substrates. You're going to want something that can 1, hold burrows well, and 2, retain moisture. Personally, I opted for a peat moss topsoil mix. They're able to dig tunnels very well, and it's also very good for the plants. And I personally recommend when keeping red-eyed crocodile skinks is going bioactive for them. Now, bioactive is going to help out in a couple ways. You're going to be able to plant live plants in there that are going to help keep that humidity up and provide natural hiding places for them, while also having that microfauna cleanup crew is going to help break down that waste where you're not having to go in there every couple of days to clean it up and, you know, keeping those stress levels on the animals lower. As far as enclosure sizes go, these guys are more of a terrestrial species, so you're going to want to keep in mind that length and width is going to be more important than height. If you're keeping just a single adult, I always recommend no less than, say, a 20-gallon aquarium, and keeping pairs, I like to give at least 40, so they have plenty of space to get away from each other if for some reason they are not compatible. Now for diet, I always say variety is the best. Currently I'm feeding mine waxworms, mealworms, dubia roaches, crickets, bean beetles, just to name at least a few. And of course all those foods are dusted with the appropriate calcium or vitamins. Don't forget, if you also decided to go with that bioactive way, they are going to be able to snack on some of those isopods and earthworms that you put in there. Now that we have some of the basic care out of the way, let's look at a quick example of how you would keep them. Now, this 55-gallon is a pretty elaborate setup that I did for mine, so I'll break down a little bit on how I achieved it. Now starting from the bottom, I siliconed around 1-inch PVC piping to hold an egg crate to create a false bottom. At that point, you can kind of see I then siliconed some weed barrier to help as a drainage layer, and then added my peat moss topsoil mix. Also, at one point I did have a bit of a waterfall feature that I had for about, I want to say 3 or 4 weeks. However, I ran into a few problems with it. There were a few issues with it leaking, and every 3 to 4 days I would come into issues with algae growth on the waterfall. So eventually I opted just take it out and put a little more plant in pork hides. Now, real quick, going up to the background, I did do a little bit of a different method. Instead of the usual cocoa fiber silicone mix, I decided to do the great stuff, and then I went ahead and sealed it with dry lock, with the final layer mixing with some animal safe paint. Not too excited with how it came out. It was actually the first and last time I did this method. Going into hides and plants, all the hides are just going to be either cork flats or cork tubes. The majority of the plants are just pothos. Pothos I love because it grows with really anything. You can kind of see the roots have now gone into the water feature, and you can't really kill them. They make these nice big leaves which help a little bit with hiding places for the croc skinks. Now let's move on to the water feature. For the part where it cuts from land to water, I just closed it off with some egg crate, and then I did put a bit of a pond liner in there to help deter any of the animals from trying to get in between these two areas. The substrate for the water is pretty simple. It was just some pond pebbles, and then obviously over time the croc skinks have now kicked dirt into it. Plants I'm not too sure about. I know that one's a moss ball, but other than that I'm not too familiar with plant IDing for water plants. Decided to keep it pretty simple. I just have a standard reptile water pump in there just for filtration. And for fish, I just have a few different species. Blue neon, some guppies, and some red tetras. You can actually see over time some of my guppies have bred, so I have a little bit of baby guppies in here as well with the adults. Also behind it, I do have a water heater to help keep the water temperatures at about 75 to 78 degrees, mainly for the tropical fish, but I'm sure the red-eyed crocodile skinks enjoy it as well. Now that we talked a little bit on keeping and caring for red-eyed crocodile skinks, we're going to move on into breeding. For breeding red-eyed crocodile skinks, the main thing you're going to want to make sure of is that your husbandry is 100% spot on. Other than that, the majority of it is going to be a hands-off process. So in the beginning, the first thing you're going to want to do before you even pair your red-eyed crocodile skinks is either put them in a new enclosure or rearrange the enclosure whichever one is in. I always prefer adding a male to a female enclosure if that's how you're going to do it. However, switching up the decor and the hides is going to help minimize that territorial instinct one of them might have. Now, once you have both red-eyed crocodile skinks inside the enclosure, the main thing you're going to want to do is keep an eye on them, see if they're bonding, if they're having any issues. Within the first 2 weeks, you should see them sharing a hide if everything's going according to plan. Fast forward to a few weeks later, your croc skinks have bonded. Now, within the next 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to start noticing that your females looking a little pudgy, start gaining weight, and then around that 6-week mark, give or take, you're going to find your first egg. Now, one of my favorite things about the red-eyed crocodile skink, and probably the main reason why I breed them, is because they're one of those few species that show parental instincts to their young. Personally, I leave my eggs with my females. Her or the male will guard them. She'll move them around to a spot that's correct for the amount of moisture that the egg needs. And then around that 90 to 100 days, depending on your temperatures, you'll get your first baby croc skink. Now, even after the baby is hatched, I'll still leave it with the parents for at least a few months. For feeding, I like to provide them nymph dubia roaches, pinhead crickets, and small mealworms. Now, for these first months, you'll find the baby constantly huddled with either the mom and dad or both. The parents will usually help the baby feed, getting the appropriate size insects. Now, around the time your baby hatches is going to be the time your mom lays her second egg, and then once that second egg is about to hatch, usually the first baby is going to be old enough to put inside his own enclosure. While this is a beautiful species to own, I definitely don't recommend it to everyone. With the amount of care that they need, they're a little difficult to keep. It makes it a little more difficult for some of our beginner reptile keepers to own. paired with the fact that they hide pretty much 24/7, they might not be the best pet for everyone. Alright guys, that wraps up the video. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. If you liked the video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up or subscribe. I am having a 100 subscriber special, which will be a full enclosure room of all my reptiles. Should be fun. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.